The Council fleet arrived at New Austin 3 days after the deadline. New Austin was a mining colony on the edge of human space, home to 50,000 people who extracted rare metals from the asteroid fields. It was not strategically important, but that was exactly why the Council chose it. They wanted to make an example, to show humanity what happened to those who defied them. Admiral Krelvan of the Zentari Empire commanded the attack force. He was a veteran of 20 campaigns, having crushed rebellions and conquered primitive species across a career spanning 40 years. As his fleet of 400 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Austin system, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This would be over quickly. The human defense force was pathetic. His sensors detected only 20 vessels, small things barely larger than fighters by Council standards. They were arranged in a loose formation near the colony's primary station. Krelvan almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Open a channel, he ordered. Give them one final chance to surrender. The human commander appeared on his screen. Captain. Danny Wright was young, maybe 30 years old, with short dark hair and calm eyes. He did not look afraid. That would change soon enough. This is Admiral Krelvan of the Galactic Council. Your position is hopeless. Stand down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. If you surrender now, your people will be treated fairly. Danny looked at him for a long moment before responding. Admiral, with respect, go to hell. The channel closed. Krelvan felt a flash of anger. These primitives needed to learn their place. All ships, advance. Weapons free. Destroy the human fleet. The Council fleet moved forward in perfect formation, the kind of disciplined advance that had broken enemy lines for 3,000 years. Their shields activated, energy barriers that could absorb tremendous punishment. Their weapons charged, particle beams and plasma cannons that could vaporize a ship in seconds. What happened next would haunt Krelvan for the rest of his life. The human ships did not advance to meet the Council fleet. Instead, they scattered in all directions, moving in ways that seemed random and chaotic. At the same time, thousands of small objects launched from the human vessels and from hidden positions throughout the asteroid field. Drones, Krelvan's tactical officer reported. Small autonomous craft. They're not showing weapon signatures. Ignore them, Krelvan ordered. Focus fire on the human ships. The Council fleet opened fire, particle beams lancing across the void. But the human ships were moving erratically, changing speed and direction in ways that made targeting difficult. The Council's advanced targeting computers were designed to predict movement based on logical tactical patterns. The humans were not following any logical patterns. Then the drones reached the Council fleet. Krelvan had expected weapons fire, perhaps small missiles or energy blasts. What he got was far worse. The drones simply accelerated. They pushed their primitive chemical engines to maximum thrust and slammed into the Council ships at a significant fraction of light speed. The Council shields were designed to absorb energy weapons. They were excellent at dispersing heat and deflecting particle beams. They were not designed to stop solid objects traveling at relativistic speeds. The kinetic energy alone was devastating. The first wave of drones tore through the Council's front line. Ships staggered as their shields overloaded. Armor plating cracked and buckled. Atmosphere vented from ruptured hulls. And still the drones kept coming, thousands of them, each one a kinetic kill vehicle that cost almost nothing to produce but carried the destructive power of a strategic weapon. Evasive maneuvers, Krelvan shouted. But the Council fleet's perfect formation became a liability. Ships collided with each other trying to avoid the drones. The discipline that had been their strength turned into chaos, and then the human ships attacked. They came in fast, using chemical rockets that produced far more thrust than the Council's fusion drives but burned fuel at an unsustainable rate. They did not care about sustainability. They cared about speed and surprise. The human vessels dove into the confused Council formation and opened fire with weapons that made Krelvan's blood run cold. Railguns, primitive magnetic accelerators that threw solid slugs of metal at tremendous velocity. The Council had abandoned such crude weapons millennia ago in favor of elegant energy systems. But there was nothing crude about the effect. The railgun slugs punched through damaged shields and ripped through armor like it was paper. One human ship, already badly damaged and venting atmosphere, accelerated directly toward a council battleship. Krelvan watched in horror as the human vessel slammed into the larger ship at full thrust, the impact creating a debris field that damaged 3 other council vessels. "They're insane," his tactical officer whispered. But they were not insane. They were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous in ways the council had never encountered. The human ships fought like cornered animals, sacrificing themselves to take down larger targets using tactics that prioritized damage over survival. Captain Danny Wright's ship, the New Austin Defense Force flagship, was one of the last human vessels still fighting. It had lost engines, weapons, and most of its crew. Danny himself was injured, blood running down his face from a gash across his forehead. But he was still on the bridge, still giving orders. "Ram them," he told his helmsman. "Maximum thrust. Take us right into their flagship." The helmsman did not hesitate. The damaged ship lurched forward, emergency thrusters pushing it toward Admiral Krelvan's command vessel. Krelvan ordered evasive maneuvers, but his ship was too large, too slow. The human vessel struck his ship's port side, the explosion ripping open 3 decks and killing hundreds of his crew. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it finally ended, 300 council ships were destroyed, or too damaged to continue fighting. Another 50 were limping away, their crews in shock. The human fleet was gone, all 20 ships destroyed. But New Austin still stood, and the council had paid a terrible price for their lesson. Krelvan sat in his damaged command center, staring at the casualty reports. 50,000 council personnel dead. 50,000 in a battle that was supposed to be a simple show of force. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. But worse than that, far worse, was the realization settling into his mind. The humans had lost. They had been outnumbered 20-1. Their ships had been destroyed, their crews killed. By every measure, the council had won the Battle of New Austin. But it did not feel like a victory. It felt like a warning. The message went out across the galaxy, transmitted on every frequency, sent to every council world. It was simple, just 3 sentences recorded by Captain Danny Wright in the final moments before his ship was destroyed. "We are humanity. We do not surrender. If you want our worlds, you will pay for them in blood." On the council homeworld of Sanctuary Prime, the 12 species that ruled the galaxy watched the battle recordings in stunned silence. They had expected the humans to break quickly. They had expected fear, surrender, and submission. What they got instead was a glimpse into the human soul, and what they saw there terrified them. High Counselor Vexnor, leader of the council and representative of the powerful Draxian collective, finally spoke. "We need more ships, many more ships. These humans are not like the others we have conquered." But he was wrong about one thing. The council did not need more ships. What they needed was to understand who they were fighting. Humanity had been at war with itself for 10,000 years. They had fought with stones and spears, with swords and guns, with tanks and aircraft and nuclear weapons. They had perfected every form of violence, tested every tactic, learned every brutal lesson. The council had fought wars, yes, but they had fought them against primitive species who did not know how to fight back, or against each other using rules and conventions that limited the violence. They fought wars the way civilized species fought, with restraint and honor and limits. Humanity did not fight that way. When humans went to war, truly went to war, they did not stop until either they won or they were extinct. There was no middle ground. There was no partial victory. There was only total war, and total war was something the council had never experienced. Admiral Krelvan understood this now, too late. He sat in his quarters, writing his report to the council, trying to explain what had happened. But how could he make them understand? How could he convey the look in Captain Danny Wright's eyes, the absolute refusal to yield even in the face of certain death? He could not. So he wrote the simplest truth he knew. The humans will not surrender. If we continue this war, many council lives will be lost. Perhaps we should reconsider our ultimatum. The council rejected his recommendation. They voted to escalate instead, to commit their full military might to crushing humanity once and for all. They had 3,000 years of conquest behind them. They had destroyed dozens of civilizations. They were the Council. They could not lose to primitives who barely knew how to travel between stars. They were wrong, and their mistake would cost them everything. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, transmitted simultaneously to every human settlement across the stars. Commander Jake Morrison was drinking his third cup of coffee when the priority alert flashed across his screen aboard the Earth defense ship Valiant. He set the cup down carefully, already knowing that whatever was coming would change everything. The holographic display activated, showing 12 alien faces arranged in a semicircle. These were the leaders of the Galactic Council, the organization that had ruled known space for 3,000 years. The central figure, a tall creature with silver skin and 4 eyes, began to speak. The translation software rendered his words into flat, emotionless English. Humans of Earth and her colonies. The Galactic Council has observed your expansion into space with growing concern. You have colonized systems without permission. You have refused to acknowledge our authority. You have behaved as though you own the stars. This ends now. Jake felt his jaw tighten. He had known this was coming. Everyone in Earth's military had known. The Council controlled hundreds of worlds and dozens of alien species. They viewed themselves as the rightful rulers of the galaxy, and they did not tolerate independence. The silver-skinned alien continued. You will surrender 70% of your colonies to Council administration. You will pay annual tribute equal to 30% of your gross economic output. You will dismantle your military fleets and accept Council peacekeeping forces on all human worlds. You will submit to our laws and our governance. These terms are not negotiable. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan stood beside Jake, her hands gripped tight on the console rail. They can't be serious, she whispered. But the alien was not finished. You have 48 hours to comply. If you refuse, the Council will take military action to enforce these terms. We have assembled a fleet of sufficient size to eliminate all human resistance. Choose wisely. The transmission ended. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Jake stared at the empty holographic display for a long moment before turning to his communications officer. Get me Earth Command. Priority 1. The response came within minutes. Admiral Lisa Grant's face appeared on the screen, and Jake could see the barely controlled fury in her eyes. She had been a naval officer for 30 years, had fought in the Mars Rebellion and the Titan Uprising. She was not someone who scared easily. You saw it, she said. It was not a question. Yes, ma'am. What are our orders? Stand by. The President is meeting with the Joint Chiefs and the Colonial Council right now. We'll have an answer within the hour. The hour felt like a year. Jake walked the corridors of the Valiant, looking at the faces of his crew. They were young, most of them. They had joined Earth Defense to protect the colonies from pirates and smugglers, not to fight an interstellar war against an empire that had conquered half the galaxy. In the mess hall, he found a group of junior officers gathered around a display screen, watching the news feeds from Earth. Every channel was covering the ultimatum. Political experts argued about whether the Council was bluffing. Military analysts showed graphics of Council warships versus human vessels, and the numbers were not encouraging. Commander, one of the officers said, is it true they have over 1,000 ships? Jake nodded slowly. That's what our intelligence says. And we have? About 250 combat-capable vessels across all of Earth Defense and the colonial militias. The officer's face went pale. The others looked at each other nervously. Jake understood their fear. The math was simple and brutal. The Council had been building their military for 3,000 years. Humanity had been in space for barely 2 centuries, but Jake had studied history. He had read about every major war humanity had ever fought, from ancient battles with swords and shields to the nuclear standoffs of the 20th century. He had learned one critical lesson. Numbers alone do not determine the outcome of a war. Will, strategy, and the willingness to do whatever it takes, those were the factors that decided who would survive. The call from Earth Command came exactly 1 hour after the ultimatum. Admiral Grant reappeared on the screen, and this time the President of Earth stood beside her. President Elizabeth Morgan was a former Marine, a veteran of the colonial expansion who had lost an arm in a mining accident on Europa. She looked directly into the camera. Commander Morrison, I'm addressing you and every member of Earth Defense simultaneously. The Council's ultimatum is unacceptable. We did not claw our way out of Earth's gravity well to become slaves to alien bureaucrats. We did not build these colonies with our blood and sweat to hand them over to tyrants who claim authority they never earned. Jake felt something ignite in his chest. Around him, his bridge crew straightened, their fear transforming into something harder. The council believes we will surrender because they outnumber us. The president continued. They believe we will bend because we are young and they are ancient. They believe we will break because they have never lost a war. They are wrong on all counts. Admiral Grant stepped forward. All Earth defense vessels are hereby placed on full combat alert. Colonial militias are activated and will coordinate with Earth Defense Command structures. We are implementing War Plan Omega, effective immediately. Jake knew what War Plan Omega meant. Every officer above the rank of lieutenant had been briefed on it during their advanced training. It was the contingency plan for an existential threat to humanity. It threw out conventional tactics. It abandoned every rule of civilized warfare. It was total war, the kind of conflict where victory was the only acceptable outcome and the cost did not matter. The Council will attack in 48 hours, Admiral Grant said. They will expect us to meet them in open battle, fleet against fleet. They will expect us to fight by their rules. We will not give them what they expect. Over the next 2 days, Jake watched as Earth defense transformed itself. Ships that had been on patrol were recalled. Weapons that had been in storage were activated. And most importantly, thousands of civilian vessels were retrofitted with weapon systems. Cargo haulers became missile platforms. Mining ships became drone carriers. Passenger liners became troop transports. The Council would see Earth Defense's official fleet and think they knew what they were facing. They would not see the shadow fleet forming in the dark spaces between planets. The civilian volunteers who were willing to turn their ships into weapons if necessary. Amy found Jake in his quarters the night before the Council deadline expired. "Do you think we can win?" she asked. Jake looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Council fleet was moving into position. Hundreds of warships crewed by species that had been conquering and subjugating others for millennia. They had weapons humanity barely understood. They had shields and armor that had turned back every attack they had ever faced. "I think we don't have a choice," Jake said quietly. "We win or we cease to exist as a free people. The Council doesn't want tribute or territory. They want us on our knees. They want to break us so completely that no other species will ever dare to challenge them again. That's not an answer." Jake turned to face her. "You want the truth? I don't know if we can win, but I know we can make them regret starting this. I know we can hurt them badly enough that they'll think twice before threatening another species. And I know that if we're going to die, we're going to die on our feet fighting, not on our knees, begging." The deadline passed at midnight, Earth Standard Time. The Council had given humanity 48 hours to respond. The response came not in words but in actions. Every Earth defense vessel powered up their weapon systems. Every colonial militia activated their defense networks. And across human space, millions of people made the same decision their ancestors had made countless times before, when faced with tyranny. They chose to fight. The Council fleet began moving toward human space, confident in their overwhelming numerical superiority. They had destroyed civilizations before. They expected this to be no different. What they did not know, what they could not understand, was that humanity had spent 10,000 years fighting each other. Every tactical innovation, every brutal lesson, every method of war that worked had been tested in blood over centuries of conflict. The Council was about to learn what happened when a species that had perfected warfare turned all that knowledge against an outside threat. They were about to discover that some species, when pushed to the edge of extinction, do not surrender. They push back. The emergency session of the Galactic Council lasted for 3 days. Representatives from 12 species gathered on Sanctuary Prime, each one demanding answers about what had happened at New Austin. The humans were supposed to have been crushed quickly. Instead, they had inflicted the worst defeat the Council had suffered in 500 years. High Counselor Vexnor stood before the assembly, his 4 arms spread in a gesture of authority. He was old, over 200 years, and he had led the Council through decades of peaceful expansion. But peace was over now. "The humans have proven more resilient than anticipated," he said, his voice echoing through the great chamber. "But they are still only one species. We are 12. We have thousands of worlds. We have fleets that dwarf theirs. We will mobilize every resource at our disposal and crush them completely." The representatives voted. It was not unanimous, but it did not need to be. The council would go to full war mobilization. Every species would contribute ships, soldiers, and resources. They would assemble an armada that would sweep through human space like a tidal wave, destroying everything in its path. What the council did not know was that humanity had been preparing for exactly this response. Colonel Pete Anderson stood in the briefing room of the Earth Defense Ship Liberator, looking at holographic displays showing council territory. He was 45 years old, a career military officer who had spent 20 years studying asymmetric warfare. He had read everything humanity had ever written about fighting superior forces, from ancient guerrilla tactics to modern insurgency strategies. "They're going to hit us with everything they have," he told his command staff. "Every ship, every weapon. They think they can overwhelm us with sheer numbers, so we're not going to be here when they arrive." His operations officer, Major Kate Phillips, smiled grimly. She understood. "We take the war to them." Exactly. They want a defensive war where they can bring their superior numbers to bear. We're going to give them chaos instead. We're going to attack everywhere at once, hit their logistics, their shipyards, their supply lines. We're going to make them defend 1,000 places while we concentrate on the weakest points. The strategy was called distributed warfare, and it was something humanity had developed fighting each other in the chaos of the early colonial period. Instead of concentrating forces, you scattered them. Instead of holding territory, you made the enemy afraid to move. Instead of fighting battles, you made the enemy's entire infrastructure a target. The first attacks came a week after the council vote. Human strike forces appeared deep in council territory, hitting targets no one thought were vulnerable. A shipyard orbiting the Zentari homeworld was destroyed by a small team that infiltrated the facility, disguised as maintenance workers. A critical communication relay in the Draxian system was hacked, feeding false intelligence into the Council's military network. Supply convoys traveling between Council worlds simply disappeared, their crews never knowing what happened. Major Kate Phillips led one of the most successful operations. She commanded a special forces team aboard a modified cargo hauler that looked like a civilian vessel. They approached a Council logistics hub on the planet Draxus, broadcasting standard merchant identification codes that they had stolen months earlier. The Council security forces let them dock without question. Merchant ships came and went all the time, bringing supplies to the military bases scattered across the planet. Kate and her team offloaded their cargo, which the manifest listed as agricultural equipment. The security officers did not bother to inspect it carefully. That was their mistake. Hidden inside the crates were military-grade electronic warfare systems. Once activated, they began broadcasting false signals across every military frequency the Council used. Orders were scrambled. Ships were sent to wrong coordinates. Defense systems activated against friendly vessels. And by the time the Council security forces realized what was happening, Kate and her team were already gone, jumping to faster-than-light travel before anyone could stop them. The chaos was beautiful. 3 Council fleets nearly fired on each other before someone managed to shut down the compromised communication network. But shutting it down meant Council forces in that entire sector were operating blind, unable to coordinate or receive orders from Central Command. Colonel Pete Anderson's fleet struck while the confusion was at its peak. They hit Council fuel depots, destroying stockpiles that would take months to replace. They attacked isolated Council patrol groups, wiping them out before reinforcements could arrive. They mined jump points, making Council ships afraid to use their faster-than-light drives without extensive sensor sweeps. And most importantly, they made the Council afraid. For 3,000 years, the Council had been secure in their power. Their homeworlds were safe, protected by centuries of military dominance. No enemy had ever reached Council core territory. But now human ships were appearing in systems that were supposed to be untouchable, striking and vanishing like ghosts. The Zentari Empire demanded more ships to protect their colonies. The Draxian Collective pulled forces back from the front lines to guard their supply routes. Smaller Council species began to question whether this war was worth the cost. The unified front that had started the conflict was beginning to crack. On Earth, President Elizabeth Morgan met with the Joint Chiefs to review the strategy. The holographic display showed Council territory lighting up with attack markers, dozens of strikes happening simultaneously across hundreds of light years. "It's working," Admiral Lisa Grant said. The Council is fragmenting. They're fighting each other for resources now instead of focusing on us. Casualties? The President asked. Lighter than projected. We're losing ships and people, but at a fraction of the rate we'd see in conventional battles. The Council is losing materiel and morale faster than we're losing personnel. But the President was not satisfied. It's not enough to hurt them. We need to break them. We need to make them understand that they can never threaten us again. Admiral Grant nodded. Then we escalate to Phase 2. Phase 2 was something that even some of Earth's military leaders found controversial. It meant targeting Council civilian infrastructure. Not killing civilians directly, but destroying the economic and industrial systems that supported their military. It meant making the Council species understand that continuing the war would cost them everything they had built. The attacks intensified. Human strike forces destroyed mining operations that supplied the Council's shipyards. They sabotaged manufacturing plants that produced military components. They hacked financial systems, causing economic chaos across Council space. They did everything short of directly attacking civilian populations, walking a careful line between total war and war crimes. Admiral Krelvan, recovered from his injuries at New Austin, found himself commanding defensive operations in Zentari space. It was a humiliating assignment for someone who had been one of the Council's most respected officers. But there was no one else with his experience fighting the humans. He stood in his command center, watching reports flow in from across his sector. Another fuel depot destroyed, another convoy missing, another communication system compromised. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, striking and vanishing before his forces could respond. How do we fight an enemy we cannot find? His tactical officer asked. Krelvan had no answer. The humans were not fighting a war the way wars were supposed to be fought. They were not holding territory or protecting assets. They were just destroying constantly, relentlessly, like a plague that spread through Council space, consuming everything it touched. On the colony world of New Terra, Commander Jake Morrison received new orders. His ship, the Valiant, had been conducting raids on Council shipping lanes for weeks. Now Earth Command was sending him to coordinate with other human fleets for a larger operation. We're hitting Sanctuary Prime, Admiral Grant told him over the encrypted channel. Not invading. We don't have the forces for that. But we're going to strike targets in the home system itself. We're going to make the Council understand that nowhere is safe. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Sanctuary Prime was the symbolic heart of the Council, the world where they had ruled from for millennia. Attacking it would be a message that could not be ignored. When? He asked. 2 weeks. Gather your fleet and rendezvous with the 2nd and 3rd battle groups. This is going to be the largest operation we've attempted. The plan was audacious to the point of insanity. Human forces would strike at the Council's heart while their fleets were scattered, defending dozens of other systems. It would require precise timing, perfect coordination, and a lot of luck. But if it worked, it would shatter the Council's image of invincibility forever. As preparations began, the Council remained in emergency session on Sanctuary Prime, still believing they were winning. Yes, they had taken losses. Yes, the humans were proving difficult. But they still controlled the vast majority of space. They still had the larger fleet. Given time, they could wear humanity down through sheer attrition. High Counselor Vexnor addressed the Assembly again. We must remain united. The humans are desperate, striking randomly because they know they cannot win a prolonged conflict. We need only maintain our resolve, and they will eventually exhaust themselves. 18 months after the Council delivered their ultimatum, the war was effectively over. The Galactic Council, which had ruled known space for 3,000 years, no longer existed as a unified power. 5 Council species had been torn apart by internal rebellions. 3 more had surrendered unconditionally to humanity. The rest were begging for peace terms, offering anything if humanity would just stop the attacks. President Elizabeth Morgan sat in her office on Earth, reading the surrender documents. Around her, the Joint Chiefs waited for her decision. This was the moment that would define humanity's future, and possibly the future of the entire galaxy. They're offering full reparations, Admiral Lisa Grant said. Recognition of all human territorial claims. Withdrawal from all occupied colonies. They're giving us everything we demanded and more. They're offering us everything because they have no choice, President Morgan replied. They're broken. The question is, what do we do with them now? It was a question that had divided humanity. In the halls of Earth's government, in the colonial councils, in the ships of the fleet, people were debating two very different paths forward. Some argued for mercy, for helping the council species rebuild and creating a new, more equal galactic order. Others argued for something far more severe. Captain Alex Turner represented the mercy faction. He had survived the Battle of New Austin, one of the few who had escaped in a life pod before his ship was destroyed. He had seen friends die in the war, had lost people he loved. But he had also studied enough history to know what happened when victors took revenge instead of peace. If we destroy the council species completely, we become the monsters they feared, he told the president during one of many meetings. We prove that their original fear of us was justified. We'll spend the next century fighting rebellions and resistance movements, becoming exactly what we fought against. General Ryan Matthews, who had led the liberation of occupied colonies, disagreed strongly. He had seen what the council did to conquered peoples. He had documented the atrocities, the labor camps, the executions. He had talked to survivors who had been under council rule for decades, who had watched their cultures destroyed and their people enslaved. The council has existed for 3,000 years, Ryan argued. They've crushed dozens of civilizations. If we let their power structures survive, they'll rebuild. Maybe not in our lifetime, but our grandchildren will face the same threat we did. The council needs to be dismantled completely, permanently, or this war will have been for nothing. The debate raged for weeks. Opinion polls on Earth and the colonies showed humanity was split almost evenly. Some wanted to extend the hand of friendship to defeated enemies. Others wanted to ensure those enemies could never threaten humanity again. Both sides had valid points, and President Morgan knew that whatever decision she made would shape human history for generations. The final decision was made in a closed session with the Joint Chiefs and the Colonial Council. President Morgan listened to hours of arguments, reviewed intelligence reports, studied historical examples of both mercy and severity toward defeated enemies. When the vote was finally called, it was close. But the decision was made. Humanity would not commit genocide. They would not kill civilians or destroy the council species as peoples. But they would systematically dismantle every structure of power that had allowed the council to dominate the galaxy for 3 millennia. Every unified government would be broken apart. Every military installation would be destroyed. Every alliance that could threaten others would be forbidden. The council species would be reduced to individual worlds, allowed to govern themselves locally, but forbidden from forming any kind of interstellar authority. Human peacekeeping forces would occupy key systems for at least a generation, ensuring compliance. Any species that tried to rebuild the old power structures would face immediate military action. It was not mercy, but it was not genocide either. It was something in between, a solution that satisfied no one completely, but that seemed like the only way to ensure lasting peace. Commander Jake Morrison, now promoted to admiral after his successful raid on Sanctuary Prime, was given command of the occupation forces. It was a strange feeling, standing on the surface of Sanctuary Prime itself, looking at the beautiful crystalline cities that had been the center of galactic power for so long. The council chambers had been emptied. The 12 seats where council leaders once sat were gone, removed and sent to a museum on Earth. The great building itself was being converted into a library, a place where any species could come to study history and hopefully learn from the mistakes of the past. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan, now a captain, walked beside Jake through the empty chambers. They had both survived the war, though not without scars. Amy walked with a slight limp from an injury at Kepler Station. Jake had nightmares about the ships he had destroyed, the lives he had taken even though he knew the war had been necessary. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Amy asked, her voice echoing in the empty hall. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I think we did the only thing we could do. The council started this war believing we were weak. They thought our youth as a spacefaring species made us easy targets. They learned the hard way that some species develop strength through conflict, not despite it. We've been fighting each other for our entire history," Amy said. "Every war, every battle, every tactical innovation we developed fighting our own kind. The council had 3,000 years of peace and conquest. We had 10,000 years of war and survival. That's not something to be proud of." "No," Amy agreed, "but it kept us alive when nothing else would have." The occupation was not easy. Some council species accepted their defeat gracefully, even with a sense of relief that the burden of empire was gone. Others resisted, forming insurgent groups and terrorist cells. Human peacekeeping forces found themselves fighting brush wars on a dozen worlds, dealing with threats that ranged from political assassination attempts to attacks on civilian targets. But humanity had experience with occupation and counterinsurgency. They had fought those kinds of wars against each other many times. They knew how to separate fighters from civilians, how to win hearts and minds while maintaining security, how to gradually build trust with former enemies. Admiral Krelvan, the Zentari officer who had led the disastrous attack on New Austin, was appointed as a liaison between human forces and the Zentari government. It was a humiliating position for someone who had once commanded hundreds of ships, but Krelvan accepted it with quiet dignity. He met with Jake several times to discuss security arrangements and peaceful transition of power. During one of these meetings, Krelvan asked the question that had haunted him since the war began. How did you do it? We outnumbered you 10-1. We had technology you barely understood. We had 3,000 years of military experience. How did one species defeat the entire council? Jake thought about all the battles, all the sacrifices, all the desperate tactics that had somehow worked. You fought wars the way you thought civilized species should fight. With honor, with restraint, with rules and limits. We fought wars the way we always have, without rules, without limits, doing whatever it took to survive. You wanted a clean victory. We wanted to make sure you never threatened us again, whatever the cost. We underestimated you. You did. But honestly, we underestimated ourselves too. We didn't know if we could win. We just knew we couldn't afford to lose. Krelvan was silent for a long time. For what it's worth, I am glad the war is over. I am glad my people will not have to fight anymore. The council thought we were bringing order to the galaxy. We were just imposing our will on others and calling it civilization. The attack on Sanctuary Prime happened on a cold morning by local planetary time. The council's homeworld was a beautiful place, with crystalline cities that reached toward the sky and gardens that had been cultivated for thousands of years. It was a symbol of everything the council represented: order, civilization, and permanent authority. Commander Jake Morrison led the first wave. His ship, the Valiant, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system along with 30 other human vessels. Immediately, every alarm in the Sanctuary Prime defense network began screaming. All ships execute attack pattern Delta, Jake ordered. Hit your targets and get out. We have 15 minutes before their main fleet can respond. The human ships scattered, each one heading for a pre-assigned target. They were not trying to invade or conquer. They were sending a message. Council military satellites were destroyed. Orbital shipyards were crippled. Communication arrays were torn apart by railgun fire. And through it all, the human ships broadcast the same message on every frequency. This is humanity. You brought war to our homes. Now we bring war to yours. Surrender, or we will turn every council world into a battlefield. The council defense forces responded quickly, but they were designed to repel a large invasion fleet, not a scattered raid. By the time they organized a coherent response, the human ships were already jumping back to faster-than-light travel, vanishing as suddenly as they had appeared. The damage was relatively light by military standards, but the psychological impact was devastating. The Council had ruled from Sanctuary Prime for 3,000 years, and in those millennia, no enemy had ever reached their homeworld. Now humans had struck the heart of their empire and escaped without significant losses. High Counselor Vexner stood in the council chambers, watching recordings of the attack. Around him, representatives from the 12 council species were shouting, arguing, blaming each other for the security failure. The unity that had started the war was completely gone now. This is unacceptable, the Zentari representative roared. My people have lost hundreds of ships defending council territory, while Sanctuary Prime was left vulnerable. Your people? The Draxian delegate shot back. The Zentari have contributed barely a quarter of the forces they promised. The Draxian collective has carried this war while you hid behind our fleets. Vexenor tried to restore order, but it was useless. Every species was looking out for itself now, pulling back forces to defend their own worlds, hoarding resources, making secret plans. The council was collapsing from within, and the humans had barely fired a shot in direct combat. While the council tore itself apart, humanity pressed their advantage. General Ryan Matthews commanded the liberation of human colonies that had been occupied in the early days of the war. He moved from system to system with the Third Fleet, and what he found made his blood boil. The Council occupying forces had been brutal. Humans were forced into labor camps. Resources were stripped from the colonies with no compensation. Anyone who resisted was executed publicly as an example. The Council claimed to be civilized, but their occupation showed the truth. They were conquerors who took what they wanted and destroyed anyone who stood in their way. Free every colonist. Ryan ordered his forces. Document every atrocity. I want the galaxy to see what the Council really is. The recordings went viral across the galactic information networks. Species that the Council had conquered decades or centuries ago saw the images and remembered their own suffering. Rebellions began breaking out on Council-controlled worlds, adding another layer of chaos to the Council's problems. But the real turning point came at Kepler Station. Kepler Station was humanity's largest industrial complex outside of Earth orbit. It was a massive structure, part shipyard, part manufacturing center, part military base. If the Council could destroy it, they would cripple humanity's ability to continue the war. So they assembled everything they had left for one final, desperate assault. 800 Council warships converged on Kepler Station, representing the combined strength of all 12 Council species. It was the largest fleet they had assembled since the war began, and it was meant to be the decisive blow that would break humanity's resistance. Admiral Chris Palmer commanded the defense with 300 human vessels. The odds were almost 3-1 against him, and unlike the early battles, the Council forces were coordinated and determined. They had learned from their defeats. They were not going to underestimate humanity again. The battle began badly for the defenders. The Council fleet came in tight formation, their shields overlapping to provide mutual support. They had learned to counter the drone swarms that had devastated them at New Austin. They advanced methodically, destroying mines and defensive satellites, closing the distance to Kepler Station with grim determination. They've learned, Chris said quietly to his command staff. They're fighting smarter. Can we hold? His tactical officer asked. Chris looked at the display showing the massive Council fleet bearing down on them. We don't have a choice. If Kepler falls, we lose our industrial capacity. We lose the war. The human ships moved to intercept, and the space around Kepler Station turned into hell. Energy beams and railgun slugs filled the void. Ships on both sides exploded, their debris adding to the chaos. The battle was not elegant or tactical. It was brutal attrition. Both sides throwing everything they had at each other. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan, now commanding her own destroyer after being promoted following Jake's success at Sanctuary Prime, led a squadron directly into the Council formation. Her ship took heavy damage almost immediately, but she kept pushing forward, targeting the Council command vessels that were coordinating the attack. All ships, focus fire on the flagship, she ordered. Take it down and their formation will collapse. The human squadron concentrated their fire on a massive Zentari battleship at the center of the Council fleet. The battleship's shields held for nearly a minute under the focused assault, but then they failed. Railgun slugs tore through the hull. The great ship broke apart, its reactor going critical and creating an explosion that damaged 3 nearby Council vessels. The Council formation wavered, but it did not break. They pressed forward, replacing the destroyed flagship with another command ship. The battle continued. For 3 days, the fighting raged without pause. Human ships fought in rotating shifts, their crews pushed beyond exhaustion. When ships ran out of ammunition, they rammed Council vessels. When ships were too damaged to fight, their crews evacuated to other vessels and kept going. Every human defender understood what was at stake. If they failed here, humanity would lose the war. On the second day, Chris Palmer's flagship was hit by a Council plasma cannon. The blast tore through the ship's port side, killing half the crew instantly. Chris himself was thrown across the bridge, his left leg shattered. But he refused medical evacuation. Seal the damaged sections and keep fighting, he ordered through gritted teeth. We hold this line. The Council forces were suffering too. Admiral Krelvan, commanding a portion of the Council fleet, watched his casualty reports with growing horror. They had lost 300 ships in 2 days. 300 ships and the humans were still fighting. How was this possible? How could one species, outnumbered and outgunned, continue to resist with such ferocity? He thought back to New Austin. to Captain Danny Wright ramming his damaged ship into a council vessel rather than surrendering. He was seeing the same behavior here, multiplied across hundreds of human ships. They would not stop. They would fight until every ship was destroyed, every crew member dead. They were not civilized warriors following rules. They were survivors willing to do whatever it took to protect their own. On the third day, the Council's will finally broke, not from military defeat but from psychological exhaustion. The admirals and commanders looked at the battlefield, saw the burning wrecks of 600 of their ships, saw the humans still fighting despite having lost 200 vessels of their own, and they understood that even if they won this battle, it would not matter. Humanity would not surrender. You could destroy their ships, kill their soldiers, occupy their worlds, but you could not break their will to resist. They would fight forever, making every victory so costly that it felt like defeat. The Council could win 1,000 battles and still lose the war. The Council fleet began to withdraw. Not a organized retreat, but a collapse. Individual ship captains simply disengaged and jumped to faster-than-light travel, fleeing the nightmare that the battle had become. The coordinated assault dissolved into chaos as Council forces abandoned the fight. Admiral Chris Palmer, barely conscious from pain and blood loss, watched the Council fleet retreat. Around him, his surviving crew members were cheering, crying, embracing each other. They had won. Against impossible odds, they had held Kepler Station. But Chris knew the truth. They had not won because they were better warriors or had superior technology. They had won because they were willing to pay a higher price. They had won because the Council, for all their power and experience, could not match humanity's sheer determination to survive. The news spread across the galaxy within hours. The Council's Grand Fleet had been defeated. The assault that was supposed to break humanity had. 5 years after the war ended, the occupation began to wind down. Human peacekeeping forces withdrew from most Council worlds, leaving behind training programs and advisory groups, but allowing the species to govern themselves. The galaxy was fundamentally changed. Instead of one unified council, there were dozens of independent worlds, each pursuing their own path. Some thrived. The Zentari Empire, no longer burdened by military expenses and council obligations, experienced an economic renaissance. They became trading partners with humanity, exchanging technology and culture in ways that benefited both species. Other former council species struggled, having difficulty adjusting to independence after millennia of centralized control. On Earth, monuments were built to honor those who had died in the war. Commander Danny Wright, who had rammed his ship into a council flagship at New Austin, had a statue erected in his hometown. Admiral Chris Palmer, who had held Kepler Station against impossible odds, was awarded every military honor Earth could bestow. Thousands of others, whose names would never be famous but who had fought and died just as bravely, were remembered in ceremonies across human space. President Morgan, now nearing the end of her second term, gave a speech on the 10th anniversary of the war's end. She stood before a crowd of hundreds of thousands, with billions more watching across human colonies and even on some former council worlds. "We did not want this war," she said. "We did not seek conflict with the council. But when they threatened our freedom, we responded the only way we knew how. We fought with everything we had and we won. But victory came at a terrible price. Thousands of our people died. Entire fleets were destroyed.